Hello everyone, and welcome back to my show, where, besides discussing Jewish religious matters, we also try to take complicated ideas about life, society, human behavior, and talk about them like normal human beings. Today I want to talk about something that almost everyone says they want, but very few people actually practice: leaving your bubble. Now, when people say, leave your bubble, they usually mean change your beliefs. When they say, expose yourself to different perspectives, they often mean, you should end up agreeing with me, because if you only knew what I know, you would certainly agree with me. But that's not what I'm talking about. Today's episode is about how to leave your intellectual bubble without abandoning your beliefs, your values, or your identity. In other words, how to talk to people who see the world very differently from you without turning it into a fight at a family dinner or a never-ending social media thread. So here I'm going to give you a few principles that actually make these conversations possible. Stay with me to the very end. You won't regret it. First, be genuinely curious. Don't try to correct others' beliefs. Respect the other person and assume they have reasons for believing what they do and that it makes total sense to them. You can ask them, what led you to that view, or what experience convinced you this is true, instead of, how could you possibly think that? Or, you're wrong, and you're wrong because... Replace those things with real questions and wait for the full answer before responding. It sounds simple, right? So why is it not something particularly common? What holds people back? Our emotions, yes, but something else as well. Prejudice and stereotypical thinking. But wait, this sounds even more than simple. It sounds almost trite, right? Everyone knows it. What are you talking about? We're past that. No, we're not. While there has been an observable decline in older stereotypical thinking like Jews do so-and-so, black people are so-and-so, or he is Russian, so he must think this way, another phenomenon regularly dominates our conversations. The logic of stereotyping itself is still alive and well. It just changed its form. Today it sounds like this: if he thinks that, he must be conservative. Or if he is conservative, then he must believe X, Y, and Z. Or often without identity labels. If she believes A, she must believe B. We do this constantly, often subconsciously, but it completely demolishes conversation. We hear one person, and then we respond with statements about entire groups. You Democrats always do that. You Republicans always think this way. And even if something like that occasionally happens to be statistically true, saying it will never help conversation, ever. So, try to separate a person from the group you think they belong to. When you both belong to groups that hold completely incompatible worldviews and have zero history of genuine conversation, sticking to group identities and ideologies makes no sense if the goal is understanding. The only place where connection is actually possible is the individual level. So try to find something in the person you're talking to that isn't typical for their group. Maybe even something that contradicts it. Not only will it help establish a connection, it's very likely that the person will simply like you more because you notice their individuality. You spotted something unique about them. And people always appreciate that. Second, separate the person from the position or belief system. Not only separate people from their groups, but separate them from their beliefs, including yourself. This is something I talk about in the very first episode of this show. There are people who internalize their beliefs about the world so deeply that they are not able to distinguish themselves from their beliefs. Tolerance for this state of things enables something we call fanaticism, or maybe it is already a form of fanaticism in itself. If you are unable to separate yourself from some of your beliefs because they have become part of your identity, for example, then you will not be able to peacefully confront them with someone who disagrees with you. Why? Because every criticism of your ideas will feel like a personal attack. Now, to be fair, there are areas where this is not only understandable but essential. Religious beliefs are a good example here. They deeply define our identity. They make us who we are, at least partly. I'm Jewish, and my identity is built not only on my sense of belonging, but on my religious belief as well. But I don't walk into a group of Christians and Muslims and say, this is what I believe and you are wrong. Nobody should do that. The real problem begins when other realms start functioning like religion. Take politics, for example. If you let political beliefs define who you are, if your ideology becomes your identity, then your politics becomes your religion. Everything becomes sacred. And once something becomes sacred, disagreement becomes heresy. At that point, productive dialogue becomes almost impossible. But before I move on, I want to address one more point. If you happen to argue with someone who unfortunately cannot distinguish their beliefs from their identity, and during the conversation you hurt them by criticizing their ideas, you cannot simply walk away and say, well, that's their problem, your triggers are your responsibility, and so on. Yes, maybe it technically is their problem, but the damage is done. And in their mind, you did it. So, if you want to repair this relationship, you have to approach them as if the responsibility is yours. Reminding them about their inability will not improve the situation. It will make things worse. 3. Know when to pause, and when the relationship itself is the point. Sometimes the most important skill in a difficult conversation is knowing when to stop talking. Not dramatically, not angrily, just wisely. When emotions start rising, when people stop listening, or when good faith evaporates, that's often the moment when continuing the conversation will damage the relationship more than help the truth. At that point, you can simply say something like, this topic matters too much for us to rush it. Maybe we should continue another time? That sentence alone can save a lot of friendships. Because in today's culture, we often behave as if every disagreement must have a winner. But many important conversations don't work like debates. They work like long journeys. Sometimes you move forward, sometimes you stop, you pause, sometimes you simply plant a small idea that grows much later. And there's something else worth remembering. We live in a culture that is hyper-connected and deeply lonely at the same time. We have constant access to people online, yet personal relationships are increasingly fragile. Friendships break over politics, families stop speaking to each other. People quietly remove others from their lives because their opinions became uncomfortable for them. So if a conversation about ideas destroys a relationship, it may actually deepen the polarization we are trying to fix. Which means that sometimes the most mature decision is to protect the relationship first. That may be also why some people decide not to talk about certain issues with certain people at all. It helps, but only as a pause. It's not constructive if that pause is permanent. So, you can still end a difficult discussion on a warm note, like, I'm really glad we can talk about things like this. Or, I appreciate that we trust each other enough to disagree. Those sentences may sound small, but they send an important signal. The relationship is bigger than the argument. And once people know that, they are much more willing to keep talking in the future. None of these principles require you to compromise your beliefs. Also, they don't mean pretending that every opinion is equally valid. And they definitely don't mean abandoning truth. In fact, they do the opposite. They create the conditions where truth actually has a chance to emerge. Because in an atmosphere of contempt and hostility, even obvious truths get rejected. So, if you consistently apply these 3 principles, something interesting will happen. You will become a rare kind of person in today's America or Europe. Someone people with different views actually want to talk to. And that may sound like a small thing as well. But in a polarized society, the simple ability to maintain respectful conversation across differences is already a quiet, powerful win. Powerful countercultural act. That's it for today. Thanks for being with me. Like, share, subscribe. And until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep the conversation going.